Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and we are joined today by Eric Saderholm, President and Director of American Pacific Mining Corp, which I saw an excellent analysis of at wealthresearchgroup.com/USGD, which I definitely urge everyone to check out. We are also always interested in digging into the subject matters of gold and mining as we appear to be entering into a new monetary age, and there's a lot to look forward to. So we will go into multiple interesting topics today, but first of all, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Now, the super cycle in commodities took gold from $250 to $1,900 per ounce, a massive move, but still far less impressive than that of the $35 to $850 in the 1970s. It then crashed to $1053 and has since risen despite higher interest rates from December 2015 until today by nearly 26%. While the gold-silver ratio is setting off alarms and buy alerts left and right, what do you think would cause gold demand to increase from here and result in higher prices?
Well, there are two things. I think you're seeing a split in how the support comes in for gold. Gold has traditionally been, there's very little industrial use for it. Of course, there's a little bit in your cell phones, et cetera, but mainly it's a store of wealth. It's a hedge against inflation. It's something to put in your retirement fund to preserve your money, your cash. It's the one type of currency you could say that never goes down to zero. You can't devaluate gold to nothing. So there's always been that portion of the people that invested, and that's been the traditional way of going about it. What's happening though in the world is to produce an ounce of gold is becoming a much more expensive proposition than it was in the past. Production costs on the Carlin Trend, where I worked until last year, were about $1,000 an ounce. So you can see that there's not a whole lot of profit coming in once you drop a gold ounce down to 1053 as it was 3 or 4 years ago. So there's a supply and demand issue which has never really been baked into the cake before with gold. I believe now you're going to get support from people that realize that the production is going to go down 50% or so within the next 10 years, and that gold is going to be scarcer. There's also another thing that I believe was at the end, kind of the opposite of what was happening in the late 90s when gold crashed from 400 to 250. That was the central banks were in the process of just selling it off. So they were flooding the market with gold all over the place. Now they're purchasing it. So they're all of a sudden they're in reverse mode 20 years later. So you've got a lot of positives out there that I think will all eventually gel and become a real push forward for the price of gold.
Yeah, I know you're a professional geologist. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to geology. I'm a big fan of geology. I'm not going to bore the audience today with going deep into all of that, but I did want to talk about, gold, the scarcity, the what goes into creating gold in the first place at a molecular level, and actually leading to the scarce supply that we have today, which obviously you look at value, subjectivity of value going over the centuries, that which is scarce and in demand at the same time is obviously a rather good call to hold. And I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, is gold more of a wealth insurance against a monetary crisis or more of an investment for making quick dividends? What do you think?
I think it's a little of both, but I still think it's a wealth preservation tool. I don't think people jump into it. They have a tendency to jump in too late, and they wind up minimizing their profits. If you jumped into gold at 1750 7 years ago, you lost your money. So I think a lot of times it is that, but the perception, there is the portion out there, say 25 or 30% of the people that do know what they're doing. They can read the indicators, and I'm actually not one of them. I would be a super rich guy if I were. But there's that 25% that are opportunistic and do make money on the way up, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, too many people tend to see green and buy and see red and sell. There's a big issue with people buying in at the top and selling off at the bottom. But mining stocks, for them to rally for the first time this decade, other than 2016, what is the psychological price of gold that will bring back excitement for the sector? Where do you think that selling point is?
I think that the turnaround point, and we've been kind of messing around with it, where we move and then we go back below 1,300 for whatever reasons there are. About 1,375 to 1,400, I think, is a barrier that once that's exceeded, then you're on your way up the staircase for possibly up a run to 2,000. That's just my own idea, my own number that really isn't based on any kind of thing but a hunch. Seems like anytime you get that $100 more than you've been trading pretty much at this 1,200 level for several years, then you'll get the punch to take you over the top. That'll be when to jump in if you're a savvy investor, because I think you have a real upside in both the metal and in mining sector, especially junior mining.
Mm-hmm. Well, President Trump has just called for QE4 and for slashing rates. It seems like politicians and central banks seem to be convinced that we live in a slow growth / low inflation world, and that printing and borrowing will now bring inflationary pressures. Yet we do see wage growth, raw material upticks, and a real push to inflate. Do you foresee higher inflation down the road?
I think it's inevitable. I think there's only so much you can do with the QE programs where you're easing this, buying somebody's securities, and then just creating cash to put into the market. A lot of times that cash gets stuffed someplace in a bank and it doesn't actually go where it's supposed to go, into lending and borrowing. So you wind up playing a game that gets you into a liquidity trap or a stagnation, and then you're kind of stuck. So when that happens, inflation, I think, it's going to be too hard to keep it from occurring. When that happens, I don't know. I'd say 3 or 4 years, we're going to start to see an uptick in that. And then mining sector shares and gold itself will start to look a little better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we've seen in the past, history tells a great, or paints a great picture of, what happens to gold in a monetary crisis. And unfortunately, there's never been a situation where massive amounts of currency was printed where it didn't end eventually in a monetary crisis. That's just the historical records show that in hundreds of examples going back 1,000 years to China. But can you explain? I wanted to get into this because I did see a report on this, and I thought it was a very interesting company and had a lot of great opportunities going forward, in my opinion. Can you explain what American Pacific Mining Corp is for those hearing about it for the first time?
Well, we're a pretty young company. We're a little over a year old. We saw a niche. One of the reasons I left Newmont, I had a relatively decent position at Newmont. I could kind of see the train wreck of merger after merger after merger of these big companies, and their inabilities to put ounces back into the ground net of depletion. So they're mining at such a furious rate that they can't possibly keep up with things, and they're just eventually going to flame out. I think the next niche right now are companies like American Pacific, smaller mining companies that have already established production profiles. Say Oceana is a good example. These guys are on a slow growth pattern, but they are growing and they are increasing the shareholder value as they move upwards. American Pacific right now, I think, fills a niche as the exploration programs of, say, a Barrick and a Newmont, which I'm very familiar with, are starting to scale back quickly, and they're starting to focus in and around the mines. So they call themselves brownfields geologists now, but they really don't get any leeway to take off and go look for other deposits. Some of these deposits that I'm referring to have been played around with by the big boys, but they always round to zero, since most of them aren't going to get to 1 million ounces. But you're also going to have low overhead. When you do finally get these into production, you're going to be producing an ounce for probably between $500 and $600 an ounce, making it a truly profitable company rather than just an ounce producer. The big companies right now producing for $1,000 an ounce are just flooding the market with very high cost ounces, high cost to produce. So that's what I'm deposits that are sitting around in Nevada in a very mining friendly jurisdiction, very easy to permit here relative to other places in the world and even other places in the United States. So as we move forward with this project, Tuscarora is obviously the flagship. We're certainly amenable, and we're already looking at a couple other projects that fit the bill similarly. Easy as a stake, no onerous land conditions underneath it, and pretty easy to go get and put it in the portfolio.
Yeah, well, and we'll get into Tuscarora in a little bit, but I wanted to ask Eric, between you and Warwick Smith, the CEO, the two main men behind American Pacific Gold Corp, you own 20% of the outstanding shares, so you definitely have millions at risk on the one hand and a lot of confidence on the other. What have been some of the previous successes you've enjoyed, and what has been Warwick's?
Warwick is, I don't know all of his history. I've dealt with him for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. He's a successful venture capitalist. He was associated with Fortuna Gold as a young man, so he rode that wave of success. learned a lot, I think, from people that were older than him, more mentor type things. He's raised a lot of money outside the mining sector as well. So he's done some lottery things, and I believe they're into other, cannabis possibly. They have some other things. So he's a very versatile money maker and money arranger, I should say. He goes out, he knows the people, he's well connected, and so he fulfills a niche that I don't have. And I think we work together well as a team because we're not interchangeable parts by any sense of the imagination. Whatever successes I have, I think were mainly, since I was mainly a big company guy until I went to work for Rob McEwen in 2006 for US Gold. My successes were from the exploration and mining side of things more than anything else. Somewhat difficult to quantify because if you go find an ore body and you walk away to find the next one and they turn it into 1 million ounces, who gets credit for it? But those are successes of, I think, being a good mentor, a decent manager, and a pretty good exploration guy, not afraid to go walk up and down the hills and bang up the knees and have a backpack on, equated to whatever success I have. So I think I'm a pretty well-rounded geologist.
Well, when the time will come for mining stocks, Nevada is going to be one jurisdiction that trades at a premium. I'm in Nevada. There's huge exploration happening here. And your asset, the Tuscarora, is located there. I understand that previously some $30 million in drilling budgets have been spent there. Yet you were able to cut a deal and purchase it for $375K and 800,000 shares of USGD. And already USGD is valued at $11 million. In other words, you bought a property at 1 cent on the dollar, and then shareholders made 30 times that in terms of market cap. What is so unique about this asset, and what can it be compared with?
It is somewhat unique, and without getting too geological, it's of the same age as the Carlin Trend, although it's not. It's an epithermal vein system. I can just leave it at that. Mainly gold and silver veins. So it's 49 million or 40 million years old, plus or minus. And in that particular time in the history of Nevada, probably 300 or 400 million ounces of gold were pumped into the crust within a several million year span. So it separates itself from other deposit types like it in the state, and the fact that it's the timing of when it was in place. If you want to look at it from a genetic standpoint of what it's similar to, it's probably more like a Midas or even more like a Fire Creek. So a highly confined, high-grade system of veins that would be exploited underground, which makes it, one, cheaper to mine and easier to permit. So it's very similar to a Fire Creek.
I'm not going to get too into geology for the sake of all those watching, but you have to notice when you go around Nevada that 30, 40 million years ago, this place was a war zone. And you can imagine what has been pumped into the earth at that time, knowing how gold is created in the first place. Like I mentioned earlier, I mean, the amount of energy, the amount of explosive action that leads to the creation of gold and supernovas and etc. I mean, it's pretty astonishing just looking around at the earth around you and knowing what had at one point happened here in Nevada. I'm right by a canyon, and it's just, you can imagine the havoc that happened at that time. But anyway, I'm not going to go too deep into any of that. I understand that you just announced this news and that a big company miner, $1 billion plus company, is joining venturing Tuscarora with you. That has to be exciting to see. What exactly is happening there?
Oh, it's very exciting. It's been a process that started last July, and I know the chief geologist. I worked with him in Newmont for many years. We worked on similar type deposits. He eventually wound up down in New Zealand, and New Zealand is where the Oceana Group, and that is the group that we've penned our agreement with. They've made a lot of money, or are making a lot of money, and are good explorers when it comes to these types of vein systems, the high grade veins. Well, they're a very successful company. We're pleased as possible that they're the guys that we wound up getting into bed with the JV. It's a 4-year deal. They can earn 75% of the project by spending $10 million in the ground, which is perfect for us. They're going to take over essentially the managing of the exploration, but I'll be part of the exploration council, obviously knowing the deposit as well as I do. So it's something that we're really excited about, to be honest, very excited that this year we'll start to spend the money, and we'll spend it wisely, especially with the tutelage and the guidance of a group that's very experienced in these types of deposits.
And other than that, what's next for the company, and what's your pitch to our audience for why you think they should get involved?
Well, right now, I think that we're undervalued, and that's just because of us being new and gold's sticking to the 300 or the 1300 level. What we're going to do this year and in the future, we already have a deposit that we're working on right now or on getting. So we're going to try to increase our portfolio, but they have to be quality projects. A lot of them have had past production, but a lot of the production was pretty old. It's like at Tuscarora, the last production really from any of the underground mines was in the early 1900s. So there's a whole lot of gold left, and they were mining gold for what, $20 an ounce back then. So there's a lot of potential even in old districts that have been mined due to changing economics, obviously. This year we're gonna do some geophysics and some drilling on the Tuscarora project, but at the same time, since we just went through a financing, we're going to responsibly evaluate other properties and start to come up with not just moose pasture ground, but what we think is really potential for mining, and that actually a mining company such as Oceana would appreciate those in their portfolio as well. So as we drive value from just the Tuscarora project, we'll drive value from increasing our presence in Nevada especially, but in the western U.S. Anywhere we can find the higher grade deposits that have been overlooked by other companies, that's where we're going to be.
Lots of exploration happening here in Nevada. Can you tell our viewers where they can find out more information and perhaps get involved? What's the ticker?
The ticker in the United States is USGDF, over the counter, and in Canada we trade on the Canadian Stock Exchange at USGD.
Okay, well, everyone can learn more by going to americanpacific.ca as well as wealthresearchgroup.com/USGD. I really thank you for joining us today, sir. It's very interesting. This is a growing industry that a lot of people are getting a lot more interested in as the tide begins to shift a lot. And like I said, we're just seeing so much action in Nevada. I've been seeing a lot in Canada as well. This is an industry that, even though historic, even though old, is going nowhere anytime soon. It's only going to grow, in my opinion, going into the future. And with the demand, the sheer demand and the scarcity, of course, of the commodity itself, I think we are entering into some good waters coming up in the future. Everyone has to do their own due diligence, as I always say here, but it's a very interesting topic, and I think there's so many opportunities down the line. Thank you for joining us today, Eric.
Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so heavily demonetized and censored by YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. The shadow banning is getting really bad, guys. Also, check our Bitcoin address right here on the screen or in the description below. We really appreciate it. And of course, check us out at the Red Pill Expo 2019. Of course, the great G. Edward Griffin and so many other incredible speakers will be there. Our link for that is below as well. And we cannot forget Mike Maloney's goldsilver.com, which you can also find in the description. One of the greatest market and monetary historians out there. We really encourage everyone to check that out. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.